There is a terrifying possibility that human consciousness was never fully human to begin with. Not metaphorically, not spiritually, literally. And according to one of the greatest physicists alive, the clue may have appeared inside the mind of a man who helped build the modern world. A man so intelligent, other geniuses were afraid of him. His name was John von Neumann, and years later Roger Penrose began to suspect that von Neumann's brain was doing something that no machine, and maybe no human, should have been capable of. Something impossible. Something non-human. Because the deeper Penrose looked into intelligence, the more one disturbing idea refused to disappear. What if the human mind is not computing reality, but touching something beyond it? At first this sounds absurd, like science fiction. But the strange part is, the people asking these questions were not mystics or conspiracy theorists. They were the architects of modern physics. The same people who helped explain black holes, quantum mechanics, artificial intelligence, and the mathematics behind the digital age. And when they followed the logic all the way down, they found a crack. A deep crack hidden beneath consciousness itself. But here's where it gets strange. To understand why Penrose became obsessed with von Neumann's mind, you first need to understand who von Neumann really was. Because calling him a genius almost feels dishonest. As a child, he could divide 8-digit numbers in his head before most children learned basic arithmetic. He memorized entire books after reading them once. He could hold pages of information in perfect detail years later. People who worked with him described conversations that felt unnatural, almost mechanical. Except not mechanical in the way we think. More like something operating several layers above everyone else. During World War II, governments quietly gathered the smartest people on Earth for projects so secret most citizens never even knew they existed. And among all of them, von Neumann stood apart. Not because he worked harder, because he seemed to see reality differently. He helped create game theory, modern computing, nuclear strategy, artificial intelligence concepts decades before computers truly existed. Some historians even believe much of today's digital civilization still runs on architectures inspired directly by his mind. And yet, the more advanced his ideas became, the more unsettling they felt. Because von Neumann did not think like a normal scientist. He treated the universe itself almost like an informational process, a system, a structure, a machine made of logic. And that raises a bigger question. If the universe behaves like computation, then what exactly is consciousness? Just another process? Just neurons firing? Just chemistry pretending to be awareness? For decades, science said yes. The brain was a biological computer, nothing more. Thoughts were calculations, emotions were electrical patterns, memory was storage. The mystery was considered solved before it was even understood. But Penrose was deeply uncomfortable with that explanation. Because the more he studied mathematics, the less he believed consciousness could ever be reduced to computation alone. And this is where everything changes. In the 1930s, a mathematician named Gödel published a theorem that shattered the foundations of logic. At first glance, it looked abstract, technical, harmless. But hidden inside Gödel's theorem was a philosophical bomb. He proved that within any logical system powerful enough to describe mathematics, there would always be truths the system itself could never prove. Truths outside the machine, outside the rules. This haunted Penrose, because if a machine follows rules, and human beings can sometimes see truths beyond those rules, then maybe consciousness is not algorithmic at all. Maybe the mind is doing something no computer can ever replicate. Not because computers are weak, but because reality itself contains layers deeper than computation. Penrose began pushing this idea publicly. Most scientists hated it. Some mocked him openly. Because by then, the world had already accepted a comforting belief. The brain is a machine. Eventually, machines will become conscious too. Simple, predictable, safe. But Penrose kept resisting, again and again. He argued that genuine understanding, true awareness, involves something fundamentally different from calculation. And strangely, whenever he thought about minds that seemed to operate beyond ordinary computation, he kept circling back to von Neumann. Not because von Neumann agreed with him. In fact, von Neumann often embraced mechanistic thinking. But because his mind represented an uncomfortable paradox. A human brain producing insights so deep, they reshaped civilization itself. Almost too fast. Almost too completely. People around von Neumann often described the same eerie sensation. It felt less like speaking to a person and more like interfacing with an intelligence already several moves ahead. An intelligence capable of compressing enormous complexity into instant intuition. But scientists found something even more disturbing. As artificial intelligence evolved decades later, researchers discovered a frightening limitation. Machines could calculate, faster than humans, more accurately than humans, but they still struggled with something strangely basic: meaning, understanding, awareness. A machine could simulate intelligence perfectly, while possessing absolutely no inner experience at all. No feeling, no self, no consciousness behind the eyes. And suddenly, Penrose's suspicion became harder to dismiss. Because maybe the missing ingredient was not computational power. Maybe computation itself was the wrong category entirely. But if consciousness is not computation, then where does it come from? That question dragged Penrose somewhere dangerous, into quantum mechanics, into the deepest and most unstable layer of reality humans have ever discovered. A world where particles exist in multiple states at once, where observation changes outcomes, where certainty dissolves into probabilities, and where reality itself seems unfinished until something, somehow, collapses it into existence. Most physicists avoided connecting quantum mechanics to consciousness. The subject was radioactive, too weird, too speculative, too close to philosophy. But Penrose noticed something nobody could comfortably explain. Quantum systems appear to resist classical computation, almost as if reality itself is performing processes no algorithm can fully capture. And then came the thought that changed everything. What if consciousness emerges from that deeper quantum layer? What if the brain is not merely processing information, but interacting directly with the fundamental structure of reality itself? Suddenly, von Neumann's mind looked different. Not superhuman, not robotic, something stranger. Because long before modern neuroscience caught up, von Neumann himself had already explored the bizarre relationship between consciousness and quantum measurement. And hidden inside his work was an implication so unsettling, many physicists spent decades trying not to talk about it. An implication suggesting that consciousness may not simply observe reality, it may help create it. But the truly frightening part is what Penrose believed could happen if that idea were true. If consciousness helps shape reality, then the human mind is not sitting inside the universe as a passive observer. It is participating in it, directly. And once Penrose followed that possibility to its conclusion, he encountered a problem so disturbing that even now, most people never hear about it. Because if consciousness is woven into the fabric of reality itself, then intelligence may not begin in the brain. The brain may only be accessing it. Think about that carefully. For over a century, science treated consciousness like steam rising from machinery. Neurons fire, chemicals react, thought appears. Simple cause and effect. But Penrose began asking a forbidden question. What if awareness is more like gravity? Not invented by matter, but discovered through it. And suddenly, the entire story changes. Because now the brain is no longer a computer. It becomes something closer to an interface. A bridge between physical matter and something deeper hidden beneath space and time. At this point, many scientists walked away from Penrose completely, not because he lacked credentials, but because the implications became unbearable. If consciousness is fundamental, then materialism, the idea that matter creates everything, may be incomplete. And if that is incomplete, then modern civilization may have misunderstood the nature of intelligence from the very beginning. But here's where it gets strange. Penrose was not drifting into mysticism. He was trying to solve a technical problem, a mathematical problem, specifically the problem of understanding. Because every computer, no matter how advanced, operates through formal rules, inputs, operations, outputs. But human beings do something odd. They leap, they intuit, they recognize truth before they can fully explain it. A mathematician suddenly sees a proof. A musician hears a melody before writing it. A scientist senses a hidden law long before evidence confirms it. Where does that come from? Penrose believed these moments might emerge from processes happening below conscious awareness, inside the quantum structure of the brain itself. And this is where everything becomes deeply unsettling. Together with anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, Penrose developed a theory called orchestrated objective reduction, or Orch-OR. To most people, it sounded bizarre, but the core idea was terrifyingly simple. Inside neurons are tiny structures called microtubules. For decades, scientists thought they were merely structural support systems, biological scaffolding, nothing special. But Penrose and Hameroff suspected something else entirely. They believed microtubules might support quantum processes inside the brain, not metaphorically, physically, meaning consciousness could emerge from quantum state reductions occurring at scales far smaller than neurons themselves. Tiny collapses of possibility becoming moments of awareness, reality crystallizing into experience. And if that sounds unbelievable, that's because it is. Even now, the theory remains controversial. Many scientists reject it. Others cautiously defend parts of it. But no one has fully solved the mystery consciousness presents. Not neuroscience, not artificial intelligence, not physics. And that leaves an uncomfortable opening, because despite all our technological progress, we still cannot explain why experience exists at all, why there is something it feels like to be you. A machine can identify pain, but does it suffer? A machine can describe love, but does it feel attachment? A machine can imitate consciousness flawlessly, while remaining completely empty inside. And that raises a bigger question. If consciousness is tied to quantum reality, could intelligence exist in forms we do not recognize? Not alien life in spaceships, something stranger, patterns of awareness embedded within reality itself. After all, quantum mechanics already shattered the old image of a cold mechanical universe. Particles communicate through entanglement across impossible distances. Observation influences outcomes. Time behaves differently at fundamental scales. Reality becomes less solid the closer we inspect it. It almost feels responsive. And when Penrose revisited von Neumann's work through this lens, the implications became chilling. Because von Neumann had already identified one of the deepest paradoxes in physics decades earlier: the measurement problem. In quantum theory, particles exist as probabilities until observation collapses them into definite states. But what counts as an observation? A detector? A particle interaction? A conscious mind? Von Neumann pushed the logic further than most physicists dared. Every measuring device is itself made of quantum particles. So what finally collapses the chain? Where does uncertainty end? Some interpretations quietly imply that consciousness itself completes the process, that awareness is not separate from physical reality, but essential to it. Most scientists avoid this conclusion because it sounds dangerous. Not scientifically dangerous, philosophically dangerous. Because once consciousness enters the foundations of physics, the universe stops looking dead. It starts looking participatory, alive in ways we barely understand. But scientists found something even more disturbing. As AI systems became more sophisticated, researchers noticed a growing illusion. Machines could mimic thoughts so convincingly that humans instinctively projected awareness onto them. People formed emotional bonds with algorithms, trusted synthetic personalities, confessed fears to machines. And yet, behind the performance, there may still be nothing there. No inner world, no subjective experience, just patterns, just prediction, just mathematical shadows wearing the mask of consciousness. And suddenly the fear changed. The question was no longer whether machines could become human. The question became whether humans had misunderstood themselves all along. Because if consciousness cannot emerge from computation alone, then creating truly conscious AI may require access to processes we do not yet understand. Processes tied to the deepest architecture of reality itself. And this is the thought that haunted Penrose. What if minds like von Neumann's occasionally glimpse that deeper structure more directly than others? Not supernatural powers, not magic, but unusual access to patterns hidden beneath ordinary cognition. A brain operating at the edge of what human biology can interface with. Because throughout history, certain individuals have appeared almost impossibly ahead of their time. People whose intuitions arrive decades before science catches up. And sometimes their ideas seem less invented than discovered, as if they tuned into something already there, a deeper order beneath reality. But if that possibility is real, then consciousness is not a side effect of the universe. It may be one of its fundamental ingredients, like space, like time, like gravity. And if that is true, then every thought you have ever experienced, every moment of awareness, every feeling of being alive, may connect to something far older and stranger than humanity itself. Which leads to the final terrifying possibility. Maybe Penrose did not simply observe genius in von Neumann. Maybe he recognized evidence that the human mind is not entirely confined to the human brain. And if consciousness truly reaches beneath physical reality, then one question becomes impossible to avoid. What else might already be reaching back?